Welcome to the Virtual Office Hours, Episode 3. I'm John Fia, teach history here at Messiah College. Megan Piet, as usual, behind the camera. Today we are going to continue in our series on the history of American evangelicalism based on the course that I am teaching here this semester at Messiah College on the history of evangelicalism. I've already said Megan is in that class. She actually led a nice discussion the other day on Whitefield and Harry Stout's book, and that's what I want to focus our attention on today. We just finished reading Harry Stout's biography of George Whitefield, the Divine Dramatist, and had some interesting and fruitful conversations about that book. We could say a lot of what we did in class, but let me try to focus on a few things that came out of the book as the students read it and led discussions on it, and we talked about it over 4 class periods, I believe, 4 50-minute class periods. One of the themes that came out, one of the maybe tensions in the book, Stout, as a good sort of social and cultural historian, tries to understand Whitefield in his own 18th century world. So for Stout, Whitefield's success comes from things like his training on the stage, right? His theatricality. Is that a word? Theatricality. His use of print culture, his participation in the 18th century consumer revolution. Religion becomes a marketable commodity. His passion and his appeal to the new birth as a sort of commodity we talked about. And that's how Stout portrays Whitefield. Of course, if we were to ask Whitefield to talk about what motivated him, Whitefield would talk about the power of the Holy Spirit or of God and so forth. So we were really grappling with the whole notion of how Whitefield would have understood his career versus the way Stout, the historian, sort of constructs his career and puts his career into some kind of a larger context. So that made for interesting conversations. Maybe something, if you're following along, maybe something that you could think about as you sort of do your own exploration of American evangelicalism, that tension between the social and cultural context that shapes a person and the deeply held religious beliefs that also motivate a person. We also talked a little bit, one of my favorite discussions was the other day we talked about, yesterday we talked about Whitefield's relationship with Ben Franklin and how or why these two men who are very, very different develop such a deep friendship. Now, you could take a sort of purely economic interpretation and say, well, Whitefield liked Franklin because Franklin was a popular printer and sold his books and his sermons and his journals. Of course, Franklin liked Whitefield because Whitefield sold and made money for him. And in some ways that's probably true, but I think most of the class appreciated Stout's more nuanced take on this, in which he did show that both of these men did have a kind of moral friendship. They both were popular people. They both were people who sort of self-constructed themselves through print, whether it be Franklin in his autobiography or his newspapers, or as Silas Dogood, whether it be Whitefield in his journals and sermons. But they were also very much concerned about improving society, and you see this in their attempt, their dream to establish a colony in Ohio, in which Whitefield, I think it was Franklin who said he'll handle the morality and Whitefield will handle the piety. So I think they do have a very close friendship, an intimate friendship. There's this wonderful quote, I'm not going to get it right off the top of my head, where Whitefield says, Whitefield tells Franklin, you have explored the mysteries of electricity through your scientific investigations. Now it is time to explore the mysteries of the new birth. So what fascinates me is neither Franklin or Whitefield, Franklin the skeptic, Whitefield the evangelical, really sacrifice their own identity. They don't sacrifice their identities in this friendship. Whitefield is constantly trying to convert Franklin, and Franklin is trying to get Whitefield to sort of be more enlightened and not so enthusiastic and passionate in his faith. Probably my favorite part of our discussion yesterday was when one of the students who was leading the discussion read, and I'm going to read it here real quick, one of the last words that Whitefield had, Franklin had to that Franklin had to say about Whitefield was, he is a good man and I love him. And one of the students leading the discussion, it's always heartwarming for a historian, history teacher to hear this, was touched by this almost to the point of tears, he said, at the closeness of their friendship. So that was a really interesting dynamic. In the end, I think my take on Stout is outstanding book, very accessible for undergraduates. It is a little bit too Whig, I think. I mean, Stout is very, very interested in sort of connecting George Whitefield to the American Revolution as a forerunner, connecting the Great Awakening to the American Revolution. I don't really see it that much. He does not mention the story, for example. If he wanted to make the connection, he could have mentioned the famous story in Newburyport, where the American soldiers passed through Newburyport in 1775 on their way up to Canada, and they pull Whitefield's body out of the tomb, rip his grave clothes off, and begin strapping the grave clothes on their bodies for spiritual power. If there's any connection to Whitefield and the Revolution, that is it. Stout doesn't mention that, although other historians have as well. But ultimately, I'm not completely convinced that maybe who knows, maybe we'll do another office hours about this someday, that the Great Awakening somehow triggered the American Revolution. And I'm a little less optimistic about that connection than Stout is. But overall, this is a great book to teach. Fine biography of Whitefield, and it really gave us a good foundation, an 18th century foundation, in the sort of rise, as Stout says, the rise of modern evangelicalism. What were the things that got this movement off the ground? We're going next to Nathan Hatch's book, The Democratization of American Christianity, and then we'll move the story of evangelicalism into the 19th century. So stay tuned. See you next week.